Sheffield Wednesday are perhaps English football's biggest underachievers this millennium. Admittedly, there is some stiff competition. Sunderland, Leeds and cross-city rivals Sheffield United have all enjoyed extended spells in League One during that time, but they've also enjoyed top-half finishes in the Premier League. Barnsley, Bradford and certainly Wimbledon have all suffered greater declines, but none of them, with the greatest of respect, have the history, potential or support of the Owls. This is a club that finished third in the last First Division season before the Premier League's breakaway in 1992, above Arsenal, Man City and Liverpool. The season before that, they lifted the League Cup, beating Alex Ferguson's Manchester United 1-0 at Wembley in the final. That was Wednesday's 10th trophy, which is more than West Ham, Leicester or Leeds, and, at that time at least, even Chelsea. In the inaugural Premier League season, the Owls finished 7th and reached both the League Cup and the FA Cup finals, all while competing in Europe, with a squad which starred England internationals like Viv Anderson, Chris Waddle, and David Hirst. They had the 6th highest average attendances and the 8th highest revenue in the English game. In 2000, though, Wednesday were relegated from the Premier League, and they have not only failed to return to the top flight for the last 25 years, the Owls have spent 6 seasons across 3 separate stints playing in League One, finishing as low as 15th and 16th in the 3rd tier of the English game. Now Wednesday's attendances are lower than Brighton, Derby or Coventry's, and their revenue, as of their last set of accounts, was the same as Plymouth Argyle's. This week, only 4,000 Sheffield Wednesday fans turned up to watch their team knock Yorkshire rivals Leeds United out of the League Cup as supporters boycott the ownership of Dejphon Chansiri. The thin-skinned Thai businessman bought Wednesday a little over 10 years ago, investing heavily with the aim of winning promotion. Following 2 failed playoff campaigns, though, Wednesday found themselves in breach of championship spending regulations, and Chansiri found himself having so-called cash flow problems. Players went unpaid, points were deducted, and protests became more prevalent. This summer, however, the situation at Hillsborough has reached a deafening crescendo, as the Owls effectively had no pre-season, only 15 senior players at a push still remain, and their owner, despite being unable even by his own admission to fulfill his obligations, is still refusing to sell. And yet, in their last 2 games, Wednesday have come back from 2-0 down to draw away at free-spending Wrexham, and they have knocked Premier League Leeds United out of the League Cup. So just what on earth is going on then? That is a question that I have been asked to make an updated video about, at a conservative estimate, probably about 8 million times over the last 12 months. Well, today is the day, so sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to the Steel City, which is in many ways the birthplace of modern football, yet is currently home to 2 beleaguered clubs, as we take a look at the one that is in far worse shape, despite being higher in the league table after 3 games, their madman tin tuner heir of an owner, and everything that has happened at Hillsborough since I last made a video about the club. Well, maybe not quite everything, but hopefully most of the important stuff. When Dejphon Chansiri acquired Sheffield Wednesday in January 2015, he inherited a very attractive club. Though the Owls had been outside of the Premier League for almost 15 years, they were still capable of drawing crowds higher than 7 top-flight teams, the club was virtually debt-free, and there were only 3 places outside of the Championship playoffs. In fairness to Chansiri, the lack of debt was partly thanks to him. It was reported that Chansiri had paid former owner Milan Mandaric £30 million to acquire the club, plus a further £7.5 million to clear the club's remaining debts. Mandaric had negotiated favourable terms to either settle or restructure several of Wednesday's large debts since acquiring the club in December 2010, which saved the Owls from entering into administration. Within 5 weeks of his arrival, Chansiri outlined his ambition to take Wednesday back to the Premier League within the next 2 years. Founded in 1867, Wednesday are England's 5th oldest professional football club, and the aim was to bring top-flight football back to Hillsborough to coincide with the club's 150th anniversary in 2017. Chansiri told BBC Radio Sheffield, quote, "We want to be back for our anniversary," adding, quote, "We will do whatever is appropriate to invest in the club to get them to the Premier League," end quote. This was, of course, music to Sheffield Wednesday supporters' ears, and Chansiri wasn't lying, at least in terms of the investment. Over the next few years, Wednesday's expenses exploded, and so too did their losses. In Chansiri's first full season owning the club, Wednesday's expenses, in terms of wages and player amortisation costs, which is to say, the payment of transfer fees spread out over the length of a contract, increased by over 50% in a single season, from £14.4 to £22.3 million, as the likes of Fernando Forestieri, Gary Hooper, Lucas João, Ross Wallace, and future Wednesday legend Barry Bannon joined the club. Portuguese head coach Carlos Carvalhal, who had been out of work for nearly 3 years, was the man entrusted with leading the project, and he came close to delivering even earlier than Chansiri's ambitious timeline. In Chansiri and Carvalhal's first full seasons, Wednesday finished 6th, qualifying for the playoffs, where they beat third-place Brighton in the playoff semi-finals, but fell to a 1-0 defeat against Hull City at Wembley in the final. The following season heralded increased spending, as Adam Reach and Almin Abdi arrived for big fees from Middlesbrough and Watford, along with Stephen Fletcher, who was signed on a free from Sunderland, but signed a very substantial 4-year contract. With Wednesday inside of the playoffs when January rolled around, more spending was sanctioned, as Morgan Fox and Sam Winnell arrived for fees, and, most notably, big loan deals were struck for Callum McManaman and Jordan Rhodes. Wednesday made the playoffs again, but this time they were defeated on penalties by eventual winners Huddersfield Town in the semi-finals. Despite sustaining heavy losses, and having failed to deliver Premier League football in time for Wednesday's sesquicentenary, that is a word which means a 150-year anniversary, and if you have to explain that, then it would just be quicker to say their 150th anniversary, but where would be the fun in that? Chansiri was unrelenting. As part of the loan deal that brought Jordan Rhodes to Hillsborough, Wednesday were obligated to sign him on a permanent basis at the end of the season for a club record-breaking £10 million, despite the fact that he'd only scored 3 goals in 20 games on loan at the club. This was an eye-watering sum, accompanied by eye-watering wages, for a club that had been outside of the Premier League for 17 years, and combined with Lucas João, Adi Noué, Gary Hooper, and Stephen Fletcher, it gave Wednesday, quite comfortably in fact, the highest paid forward line outside of the Premier League. Though the groundwork had been laid in previous seasons, it was in 2017-18 that the Chansiri project collapsed. Their combined wages and player amortisation costs had skyrocketed to £53.5 million, by far the highest in the history of the club, and up an extraordinary 270% in the 3 years since Chansiri arrived. Wednesday's wage bill alone, at £42.4 million, had more than trebled, putting it among the Championship's elite. In fact, it was the second highest wage bill for a non-parachute payment Championship club in history at the time, trailing only free-spending Wolves, who signed the likes of Diogo Jota and Ruben Neves, while appointing Nuno Espirito Santo on George Mendes' recommendation, during the same season. Whereas Wolves won the league at a canter though, winning 99 points as one of the most impressive Championship teams of all time, Wednesday finished 15th on 57 points. Whilst costs had risen by nearly 300% under Chansiri, revenue had only risen by 70%. The end result was truly gargantuan losses, over £66 million in Chansiri's first 3 full seasons owning the club, and more than £35 million in 2017-18 alone, with only 2 failed playoff campaigns and a bottom half finish to show for it. Because Wednesday had targeted numerous older and more experienced players, and because Chansiri has an aversion to selling players regardless, there was also very little sell-on value wrapped up in an expensively assembled and maintained but underachieving Owl squad. According to insiders, documented across multiple accounts, Chansiri views his Wednesday team as a family, and you don't sell members of your own family. Well, unless you are Joseph's jealous half-brothers in Genesis 37, eh? Am I right? This guy knows what I mean. Speaking to the Sports Agents podcast recently, Chris Powell, who served as Danny Roll's assistant at Hillsborough for the last 2 years, stated, quote, "He doesn't sell players. He keeps them to the end of contracts, and they walk away," end quote. Powell added, quote, "We had a player last year we could have sold to Wrexham, I won't say who it is, and he scored a goal. He doubled the price. So we told Wrexham, look, he's going to cost this, and they said, okay, we're thinking about it, we'll get back to you. And then he said, oh no, we'll double the price. And we're like, why? Well, he scored a goal, he's worth more. Bizarre. Really bizarre. End quote. That player, it has since been revealed in an article by Paul Hurst in The Times, was Michael Smith, who joined Preston North End on a free transfer this summer after his contract at Hillsborough was terminated by mutual consent. The same article also reports that Chansiri rejected a massive £12 million bid from Fulham for Fernando Forestieri in 2017, before the Italian's contract expired, and he too left the club for nothing, in 2020. It has become an all too familiar tale for Wednesday. In fact, in over 10 years owning the club, Chansiri has only sanctioned the sales of 9 senior players for transfer fees, generating total revenue of barely £10 million during that time. That is less than the likes of Plymouth Argyle and Exeter City over the same period. It is 1/3 of what Peterborough United have raised, 1/4 of what Barnsley have brought in, and a staggering 1/9 of Huddersfield Town's profit from player sales over the last decade. By the 2017-18 season, Wednesday was spending 168% of their revenue on wages alone, up from 90% when Chansiri bought the club, and that spiralled to a record-breaking 209% in the 2020-21 season, which was the 6th highest percentage in the history of the championship, due to depleted revenue as a result of COVID-19 and games being played behind closed doors. Chansiri tried to offset Wednesday's massive losses by using all of the usual tricks, like sponsoring the club himself and buying the stadium, but in true Chansiri style, none of it was done in a usual or competent way. The 3 owner-affiliated companies that sponsored Wednesday, for example, namely Chansiri, Elevate, and D-Taxis, were hardly Bet365 sponsoring Stoke City or Etihad sponsoring Man City. Chansiri, for a start, which could be found plastered across the front of Wednesday's shirts, and can still be found in big bold letters covering Hillsborough's North Stand, appeared to be literally just the owner's surname. There is a company called Chansiri Limited, solely owned by Dejphon, which was incorporated in 2015, but as per their accounts with Companies House, the business doesn't appear to have ever traded. Elevate, Wednesday's former kit manufacturers, did manufacture the club's kits, Wednesday claimed, as well as being a clothing company and a planned energy drink brand. According to reports, though, Elevate never produced kits or clothes of any kind for anyone else, and no energy drinks were ever produced or sold. And finally, my personal favourite, was D-Taxis, a taxi business which didn't have any cars or drivers, also owned by Chansiri, which sponsored Wednesday alongside City Taxis, an actual Sheffield-based taxi business that had cars and drivers, and wasn't owned by Chansiri. All of these sponsorships were investigated by the EFL, but the club was never formally punished for them, reportedly because, bogus as the companies themselves may or may not have been, the sponsorship payments were deemed to be of fair value, which somewhat begs the question, why not just get some actual sponsors? The stadium sale, likewise, is a trick that was previously utilised by the likes of Villa, Derby, Birmingham and Reading in an effort to avoid PSR or FFP breaches, before that loophole was shut down by the EFL, but whereas it worked as a temporary measure for those clubs, Wednesday's sale went through after the relevant accounting period had concluded, meaning that they breached the EFL's spending limits regardless. The £60 million sale to Sheffield 3, a company wholly owned and controlled by Chansiri, therefore didn't prevent the Owls from being charged with an £18 million breach in November 2019 and hit with a 12-point deduction in the 2020-21 season. That was reduced to 6 points upon appeal, but during a season in which the club burnt through 3 different managers, including an ill-fated 6 weeks under Tony Pulis, which was enough to retire the Welshman, those 6 points saw the Owls relegated. By this stage, some cuts had been made. The big spending on new arrivals had been curtailed, the wage bill almost halved, and Lucas João had been sold to Reading in the only major player sale of the Chansiri era. Tellingly, Reading were part-owned by Narin Nirattaranan, apologies if I am pronouncing that wrong, Narin, at the time, whose father co-founded the Thai Union Group, or TUG, alongside Dejphon's father, Dejphon Chansiri, in 1977. João then, if you like, who was sold for between £5 to £6 million, was staying somewhat within the family. The Thai Union Group, who are the world's largest exporters of tin tuna, you'll never sing that, are the major source of the Chansiri family's wealth. The family still owns 18.3% of TUG, which has annual revenue of around $4 billion and net profit of approximately $150 million. While Wednesday's fortunes have declined in recent years though, so too have TUG and the Chansiri families. According to Forbes, the family's estimated net worth fell by over 25%, from $720 to $525 million, from 2019 to 2020. In Forbes' updated list of Thailand's 50 richest families and individuals in 2025, the Chansiris didn't feature at all, suggesting that, according to Forbes at least, their wealth had fallen below the $420 million cutoff point. David Hurst's recent Times article reported that Dejphon owned approximately 40 million of the family's 815 million shares in TUG, and that they had almost halved in value since he bought Wednesday in 2015. It is unlikely that the Chansiri family are living hand to mouth, but they are not so unfathomably rich, in football ownership terms, that Dejphon pouring £170 million into a championship club, including his purchase price, with somewhere between zero and absolutely soddle prospect of return, isn't a substantial blow to them, and plainly unsustainable. What's more, it's not as though Dejphon is the family's patriarch or most powerful voice when it comes to asset allocation. Dejphon Chansiri, who co-founded TUG in the 70s, is 90 years old now. He resigned as the company's chairman 3 years ago, alongside executive director Dejphon Chansiri, after being sanctioned by Thailand's Security and Exchange Commission for alleged insider trading. Thailand Security and Exchange Commission alleged that 9 Thai union shareholders had engaged in insider trading between October and November 2017, in advance of the group publishing their Q3 results, which they had received advance notice of increased profits. The individuals were accused of buying TUG shares and of instructing friends and relatives to do likewise, though there was only actually a very marginal increase in the company's share price after the results were made public. Nonetheless, Dejphon was fined over $100,000 and barred from serving as an executive or director of any company for 14 months, as reported by Seafood Source, which is personally my favourite outlet for all things business and finance related within the world of seafood. And he was replaced as TUG's chairman by his eldest son Dejphon, who is now the company's chairman and CEO. According to reports, Dejphon has never been heavily involved in the family business, outside of his shareholding, and Dejphon had been lined up as his father's successor for over 30 years, having joined the company in 1990 and now owning over 535 million shares between him and his spouse, according to TUG's own reporting, which is about 65% of the family's total shares and 12% of the company as a whole. As I said in my previous Wednesday video 2 years ago, it may be cruel to suggest that Dejphon's ownership of Sheffield Wednesday might contain some clues as to why his father seemingly didn't want him running the family business, but it may also be true. When Dejphon bought Wednesday, he was also reported as independently owning a, quote, thriving property and construction company in Thailand, but try as I might, I can find no publicly available information about any of that. That's not to say that they don't exist, or that they're not, or weren't thriving, just that I can't find anything to substantiate those claims, and I find it rather bizarre that, when they were first made, no one in the British press appeared to make any effort whatsoever to actually scrutinise them, or Chansiri's broader business credentials. I don't actually find it bizarre at all. Local and investigative journalism budgets have been stripped to the bone, resulting in very little original news gathering these days, which is part of the reason why people are often very poorly informed or outright misinformed. But I do find it odd that more people aren't skeptical when they hear grand yet almost totally unsubstantiated claims. Chansiri, therefore, is a man with very little to no known business acumen, who also reportedly had very little interest in or knowledge about football before he bought Sheffield Wednesday, a decision which was reportedly influenced heavily by his son At, who was described as being 10 or 11 years old at the time. After leaving Hillsborough, Carlos Carvajal claimed that Chansiri's son, a literal child, I'll just remind you, had the final word on his appointment. Carvajal stated, and I quote, he had seen some things on the internet, some press releases in Turkey, and some games. The purest reality. The decision of a 10-year-old kid opened the door for my life's challenge. And at that moment, I felt that I was starting my career seriously. End quote. Detached owners have enjoyed success in football in the past, though typically not by consulting their young children, but Chansiri has never been detached, just ill-informed, inexperienced, and wholly incapable. He is actually extremely hands-on, according to those who have worked under or alongside him, attempting to micromanage virtually any and all aspects of how the club is run. The recent Times article reported that Chansiri demands that employees get at least 3 quotes from suppliers before signing off on any purchases, even for simple training or office supplies. It was reported earlier this month that the club was so cash-strapped, players were forced to buy their own sock tape, as the club suppliers were refusing to send any owing to an unpaid bill, something which might have been a challenge for some, as players were paid late again in July for the 4th time in 5 months. Wednesday have no board of directors, no CEO, no sporting director, and no director of football. They don't even have any other shareholders, with Chansiri listed as the club's sole officer and person with significant control with Companies House. Chansiri is reportedly not only reluctant to delegate anything, he has been described as being both rude and dismissive to those who he deems to be below him, addressing grown men as boy, and reportedly walking out of rooms mid-conversation. Consequently, there is no conduit between players, manager, and the owner, despite multiple Wednesday managers reportedly asking for one to be brought on board, meaning there is just a direct line to an owner who, allegedly, rarely has any interest in anyone else's thoughts or suggestions. The only person who appears to have Chansiri's ear on a consistent basis, outside of his son, is Amadeo Paixão, a slippery figure who doesn't appear in any official Wednesday documentation, nor among the staff section of Wednesday's club website. Paixão has been described by Chansiri himself as being his own personal advisor. Frequently spotted at Hillsborough, Paixão previously worked as a consultant for Dejphon Sports, a Malta and UAE-based agency which had a focus on third-party ownership. The group was enormously powerful during the mid-2010s, before FIFA banned third-party ownership, and its staff and executives dispersed elsewhere. Paixão founded Foremost Sports Consultants LLP in 2016, about 18 months after Chansiri bought Wednesday, by which stage he was already described as being an instrumental figure at the club. Chansiri stated in 2021 that his advisors had, quote, started helping me with regards to selling players and with commercial things, end quote. Since then, Wednesday have sold 5 first-team players for a combined £3 million, and the club has gone into financial meltdown, so that's going well. There is a great deal of speculation around Paixão's role at Wednesday, the extent of his involvement in transfers and contract negotiations, and the degree to which he has benefited from those transactions to the alleged detriment of the club themselves. I should clarify, I have no evidence to substantiate those claims, which is why I describe them as speculation and allegations, but it seems likely that, once this nightmarish period is over for Sheffield Wednesday supporters, the truth will come out with the fullness of time. We can but hope. Chansiri, meanwhile, is said to have repeatedly joked about the prospect of knocking Hillsborough down and replacing it with flats or a shopping centre. As with his inquiry to staff as to whether they could make the River Don, which runs by Hillsborough, flow in the opposite direction in order to improve the feng shui, no one appears to be quite sure when Chansiri is joking and when he's being serious. The state of Hillsborough itself is certainly no joke though, with the stadium's north stand, which sports Chansiri's name, being temporarily but symbolically shut down by the council owing to safety concerns relating to its structural integrity during pre-season. It has since been reopened, though it was empty for Wednesday's midweek clash with Leeds owing to supporters boycotting, and reports suggest that it will take at least £10 million just to carry out the necessary maintenance work to keep Hillsborough fully operational over the next few years, let alone to carry out any upgrades or modernisations. Fortunately for Wednesday, they didn't have to play at Hillsborough in pre-season, because they didn't actually play a single pre-season fixture at all. As most players waited to see if they would be paid, even Wednesday's Middlewood Road training ground was unavailable due to 2 new pitches not being ready yet, exiling the squad to the Jubilee Sports and Social Club and a week's worth of training at England's St George's Park in Burton. Danny Roll, the architect of Wednesday's Great Escape 2 seasons ago, who masterminded a quite extraordinary 12th place finish in the circumstances last season, reported for training 2 weeks late, despite it being known that he would be leaving months ago and replaced by his former assistant Henrik Pedersen because the terms of his contract termination hadn't yet been agreed. They were finally sorted out on July 29th, less than 2 weeks before Wednesday's opening game of the season, away at newly relegated Leicester City. When that game started, there were only a tiny number of Wednesday fans in the sold-out away end, as most stayed away until the 5th minute in protest at Chansiri's ownership. Some had only just filtered in when the Owls took a shock early lead, but visibly tiring towards the end of the game as a threadbare squad who just had an almost non-existent pre-season and who were reduced to 10 men on 76 minutes, Wednesday went 2-1 down with just 3 minutes left on the clock. A 3-0 defeat at home to Stoke City looked more characteristic of what one would expect of a club and a squad in Sheffield Wednesday's current state. But since then, the Owls have battled back from 2-0 down to enjoy a Hollywood ending away at Wrexham, whose supporters and owners lent admirable support to their cause, before beating Premier League Leeds United on penalties in front of an almost empty home crowd in the League Cup, whose supporters didn't lend as much support to their cause. That victory, secured by a team which featured 4 20-year-olds and 5 teenagers, will go down as one of the biggest upsets in English football this season, regardless of what happens between now and May. For all of the chaos off the pitch, there is an astonishing resilience around the core of players that have been left behind, who seem to be flourishing as beleaguered underdogs, even if they would quite like to be paid on time. An injury to young goalkeeper Pierce Charles, one of the few remaining assets left at the club, appeared to be a hammer blow, but Ethan Horvath, signed on loan from League One Cardiff City, was the man of the match in Wednesday's inspired win against Leeds. Teenage forward George Brown, making his first start for the Owls, was also inspired, as was fellow 19-year-old Cole McGee, a centre-back who arrived this summer on a free transfer from Preston North End, having only previously played 3 games for Chorley in the National League North, before coming up against the likes of Dan James, Willie Gnonto, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Although, admittedly, on that showing, he might have faced more clinical centre-forwards in those 3 National League North appearances. At the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of both age and experience, Barry Bannan provides a rare constant while all else crumbles around him. Age 35, Bannan was out of contract in the summer and reportedly turned down offers from Middlesbrough and Millwall to earn 3 times what Wednesday offered him to stay in South Yorkshire. He is, without a doubt, still the best and the most consistent player at the club, and among the most accomplished midfielders in the Championship. The reality, however, is that whilst all the character and spirit in the world may be enough to get Wednesday over the line in a remarkable cup tie, it cannot, any sane person would have to imagine, sustain them over the course of a 46-game championship season, not least when they are still facing the likely prospect of yet another points deduction. Despite Ethan Horvath's excellent start, the Owls are also unable to add anyone else to their squad until they can demonstrate to the EFL that they will be able to pay them. Wednesday are under a fee embargo until 2027, preventing them from paying any transfer or loan fees for the next 3 transfer windows, including this one, and they are reportedly prohibited from signing players on more than £7,000 a week. Even if those stipulations are met, however, the EFL are understood to, understandably, currently be refusing to sign off on any senior deals, on any salaries, on account of Wednesday's repeated inability to pay their players on time or at all, only granted special dispensation in the case of Horvath because their 20-year-old first-choice goalkeeper is expected to be sidelined for the next 4 to 6 weeks. In 2023, when news of a £2 million debt with HMRC prompted criticism from some supporters, Chansiri responded by calling for the fans to repay the debt themselves, stating, quote, "If you want to save your club, this is your chance. Do not protest, save your club. If not, we will get a transfer ban over 3 windows. There's a possibility we will go to League 2 or the National League. If 20,000 people gave £100, then it's £2 million, and it'd be clear. So we can finish it. That would cover everything, HMRC and the wages." End quote. The relationship between Chansiri and Wednesday supporters was already fractured, but this was the point of no return as far as many were concerned, not least since they were already being asked to cough up some of the most expensive season and matchday tickets in the division. Chansiri also relaunched his novel 10-year season tickets, which only begin counting down your 10 years when the club reaches the Premier League, and which could only be purchased either by cheque, cash or invoice in a desperate attempt to raise cash. The 10-year tickets were available for between £5,500 to £8,000, though it is unclear how many of them were sold, and at the same time, Chansiri announced that, quote, "From now, I will not put additional money into the club," end quote, adding that, quote, "Some fans need to have more respect for owners of clubs and not be so selfish, thinking of their own benefit without doing anything good to the club. Those fans who create trouble to the club and myself and believe that they are the real owner of the club need to be responsible for the financial matters of the club from now on." End quote. It was at this time that I made my last video about Sheffield Wednesday, almost 2 years ago, which was received positively by most Wednesday supporters. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think they were exactly thrilled about the contents of the video, but many of them appreciated the coverage when it wasn't getting much national or international attention. There was a small number of supporters nonetheless, somewhat to my surprise, who were still broadly supportive of Chansiri and who felt that criticism of him was either unhelpful or unreasonable. 2 years on, having paid far too close attention to the trials and tribulations of Dejphon Chansiri for someone who doesn't even support Sheffield Wednesday, I think that you would do well to find too many supporters, outside perhaps of his son, who are still supportive or appreciative of his ownership. Be that as it may, whilst what little support there may once have been for Chansiri has all but eroded, pockets of apathy remain. I watched a video of a reporter from ITV interviewing Wednesday fans outside of the King Power Stadium, and amongst those who were supportive of boycotting the first 5 minutes of the match, which were, it must be said, the majority, there was a woman who expressed her opposition to the gesture of dissent.
I don't think this will achieve anything. I think it's pathetic. There's better ways to protest.
Which are?
Which are not keeping your fans out from the game. We should be in there cheering the team on as they're coming out.
I don't want to say anything mean about this woman. I am sure that she is a lovely person who loves her club, and of course, all football fans are free to support or not support their club and express their views in whichever way they see fit. But having said that, it did give me flashbacks to when Hull City fans, my club, were trying to organise in opposition to the Alam's ownership, which could, at times, be very fragmented. You see it in other countries, and Germany is often my go-to example of this, the way in which fans organise at times with almost military precision and coordination, such as when CVC Capital Partners were in talks to acquire a percentage of the DFL's media rights. Fans from virtually every club united in such consistent and destructive protests, which couldn't be ignored, that the DFL eventually relented and abandoned the potentially lucrative plans. I am sure that some supporters didn't think that throwing tennis balls on the pitch was the best idea. Maybe they were worried about disrupting the match or just felt that there were better tactics that they could pursue. But once that plan was in place, the buy-in was almost ubiquitous. I'm not sure if it is something to do with English football culture specifically, or, and I think this is probably more likely, the sharp elbows of English society as a whole that set in during the 1980s. And yes, Mr. Dark Judge in the comments, you can consider this as me blaming Thatcher again, but there is such a shocking lack of coordination and solidarity that stunts almost all collective action in this country, within and outside of football, and by the time that some degree of unanimity is finally reached, it tends to be far too late. The incredibly effective European Super League protests are pretty much the only contemporary example of that not being the case, but instead of that empowering people and making them realise how effective collective action could be, it seemed to be forgotten about within weeks. I'm not telling anyone how they should protest, to be clear, or how they should feel about protests. It is just something that I noticed after my last Wednesday video, and personally, I find the whole thing a bit depressing. It was reported in that recent Times article by David Hurst that a couple of years ago, Chansiri unsuccessfully tried to raise £1 billion from investors to launch a blockchain venture with his presentation described as being laughable, and that he had attempted to sell a box of unrefined gold located somewhere in Africa, which narrows it down, that was said to weigh 500 kilograms. That is probably about the same as the entire Sheffield Wednesday team that started against Leeds, who had an average age of 21. It paints a picture of Chansiri as a man desperately scrambling to raise funds, either due to his own financial peril, having pumped £170 million into Wednesday, while his shares in the family business have nearly halved in value, or because, as the son who wasn't entrusted with running the family business, he has a chip on his shoulder and a point to prove. Or indeed, both of the above. It has been speculated for a number of years that Chansiri, for reputational reasons perhaps even more so than financial ones, can't countenance the idea of losing money on his 10-year investment in Sheffield Wednesday. That is why he is seemingly obsessed with the idea of reaching the Premier League, personal vindication, and being able to recoup his £170 million either through the proceeds of becoming an established top-flight club or by selling up. A brief flirtation with the playoffs last season, remarkable as it was, may actually have bred further delusions in Chansiri's head that his Premier League pipe dream is attainable. But Wednesday don't have a squad at the moment, let alone a promotion-chasing one. They can't add to their ranks because Chansiri is unable to fulfill his obligations and convince the EFL that he is capable of paying players, and the likely prospect of a points deduction means that the Owls are currently the bookies' overwhelming favourites to get relegated this season. It's reported that Chansiri still values Wednesday at £100 million, with reports of talks with John Textor having opened while I was recording this video. Crystal Palace, and indeed Lyon fans, may have one or two words of warning for Wednesday about the multi-club ownership-obsessed American, but many Wednesday fans will feel as though beggars can't be choosers. The likelihood of anyone coughing up £100 million, though, when the only documented bid to date was believed to have been £40 million, seems extremely remote. Failing Chansiri paying a visit to planet Earth anytime soon, Wednesday may become the first club to place their trust in the newly founded independent football regulator, which doesn't yet have a chairman, but whoever he or she is, it is reported that they will find Wednesday's case on their desk on day one. According to reports, the IFR may seek greater regulatory powers through a vote in the Commons, which would allow them to remove unfit, improper, and persistent rule-breaking owners and chairmen who would aim to be causing grave harm. If Chansiri doesn't fit into that bracket, it's difficult to imagine who would. In 2 years' time, Sheffield Wednesday should turn 160 years old, but Owls fans are no longer dreaming of Premier League football for their anniversary, just new owners and a football club to support. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it or found it remotely interesting or informative, and as always, I do mean even if only remotely, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for both this channel, HITC Sevens, and also my second channel, Alfie Potshammer, where I promise you I will soon, eventually, at some stage, be uploading another video. Both of those should be about to appear on your screens now or very shortly, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can now support me additionally, if you are able and a big fan of the channel, either by heading over to the Alfie Potshammer YouTube channel and becoming a channel member, or by heading to buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potshammer, where you can do likewise, become a channel member that is, but Google won't steal 30% of it, which is nice. But either's great, and yeah, you can also find me on various social media platforms via the username @HITC Sevens, usually. But that's all from me. I hope that you're doing well in life. If not, I'm sure things will pick up soon. Don't let it get you down. I'll see you next time. Take care out there. I love you all. Cheers.